The Ronald Evangelistic Association is pleased to present Wes White with Turn the Page, featuring Ron Dart.
Have you ever considered trusting God as a moment-by-moment choice, particularly during hard times? Here's a Bible example. After God performed miracles in the wilderness, His chosen people trusted Him intensely, but only temporarily, because it wasn't long after most of these miracles that the grumbling began anew. We see this in the book of Exodus over and over again. Isn't it often the same way for us today? We trust God when things are going well, but when things go wrong, we tend to become introspective. We overanalyze God's motives, and then our trust flow slows down. In the Feast of Tabernacles sermon you're about to hear, Ron Dart expounds on the parable of the sower and the seed in light of tough times. When people have plenty, it seems as though they don't need God. But when things get bad, well, it often becomes a different story, doesn't it? And here's where the choice we face comes into play. And it's a simple choice, really. Choose to trust God in all circumstances. Now, let's turn the page back to 2008 and a timely sermon entitled Living in Hard Times, where Ronald L. Dart reminds us that hard times offer a golden opportunity to end up for the better.
We're living in troubled times, but it's a mark of how far we've come that we get in a panic at the idea of living in hard times. Problem is, you really would have to find your great-grandpappy and talk to him to get somebody to tell you about troubled, hard times. During the Great Depression, we had 25% unemployment. 1 out of every 4 people who normally would be at work did not have a job. And the great preoccupation of nearly everyone at that time, the biggest thing on their minds was food. How am I going to eat tonight? How are my children going to eat tonight? How are we going to eat tomorrow? And it was the dominant thing. How am I going to get a hold of some food? How am I going to feed my wife? How am I going to feed my babies? And yet, the sun came up every morning, and it went down every evening, and the birds didn't even notice the difference in the way things were going in the economy. Babies were born and grew up whole and healthy. Allie and I were born in the Great Depression, and here we are. We survived it. Of course, both of us were born in small-town America. Allie's parents had 10 children. Her dad had 10 of them he had to feed. But, of course, they lived in the country, in a little small town, and they grew some of their own food, most of it, I think, in that period of time. And the same thing was true where I lived. Everybody grew their own food. They had cows. They milked every day by hand, and so on it went. But people did make it in that time. And in spite of everything the government did, of course, on the other hand, there are some who say the government prolonged the Depression and made it worse, but we'll let that rest for the moment. In spite of everything anybody could do, we went on to become the wealthiest and the most powerful nation the world has ever seen. Think about that. And think about how panic is not necessarily the best response to what goes on. We've been living the past 50 years really in a fantasy world in most ways. And what is ahead of us now is a lot more like normal times. Normal times basically means that we are going to live within our means. And it is panicky to think about having to live within our means. But that's one of the things people are going to have to do. We have been living in very rare economic good times in world history. Foolish people have been spending way beyond their means, and they've been helped along the way by government programs and investors who are masters at creating counterfeit wealth, and the result of it all has been to really create a bubble which most of us participated in, very few people recognized, and the people who did see it, nobody was listening to them, even though many of them tried to tell us. Now we may be heading back to a time when all of us have to learn to live within our means. It's a shock. It must be a terrible shock for some people to get a letter from their bank saying, we have capped your credit limit at where it is right now. You can't use your credit card above whatever the amount you actually have built up in this account. You know, you don't realize it necessarily. I know, the reason why I think you people are here is you're not in the category of people who've been doing that, or you'd be stuck today. But the fact is, we had a tenant. I got a notice from the bankruptcy court in the mail from it having to do with one of the tenants of our properties. The lady had run up $42,000 in credit card debt, all by herself. And so here they were now, having to pay that off. And where they went from there, I really still don't know. But lenders are closing out people's lines of credit, and that is not altogether a bad thing. It's better overall that we live within our means. And maybe we will learn the meaning of that it's not necessarily good news when there's a knock on the door and we open it and the person there says, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. You've got to learn that we're going to have to depend on ourselves. Harder times may be coming. And I think it may be a good thing for Christians that they do. Why do I say that should be there? I can tell you this much. Christians grow stronger in hard times. Christians grow weaker in affluence. It's a law. I'm sorry. It is just the way it is. In affluent times, we grow weaker. In hard times, we grow stronger. We grow stronger even still under persecution. It is the hard times, it is the difficulties that we strive, and it is that marvelous word we take from the first chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation, to him that overcomes will I give. And we understand that we have a battle to fight. You know what's also true, I think? It's just as true in the broader society as well. Nations grow weaker when things are easy and times are good, and they grow stronger when they face challenges and win. It is a law of human nature, and I can't repeal it. There are two illustrations I want to give you along this line. The first comes from the prophet Hosea, writing long, long ago. He was a prophet of the house of Israel, and he came to them at the very height of their prosperity. And the poor guy, God told him, I said, I want you to go take a wife of the daughters of whoredom. Had to go marry a prostitute. Of course, that was a mark of the society in which he was living. And it was a part of the message that Hosea had to give to the people of that time. He wrote this, actually God spoke it to him, and he wrote it down in Hosea chapter 4, verse 6. It is one of the most apt prophecies for the times in which you and I live that you'll find anywhere in the pages of the Scripture. Hosea 4, verse 6. My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I will reject you, that you will be no priest to me. Seeing you have forgotten the law of your God, I will forget your children. This is a stunning thing to think about. Because you have forgotten the law of your God, I will forget your children. As they were increased, so they sinned against me. I will change their glory into shame. Has it been true, as a people, as a nation, that the wealthier we have become, the richer we have become, the more, as a people, we have sinned against God and turned away from Him? They eat up the sin of my people. They set their heart on iniquity. There shall be like people like priests. I will punish them for their ways and reward them for their doings. You see, one of the things you keep coming up against is priest. And what he's telling us is simply this. It's not only the people, it's their preachers that are selling them down the wrong road, and it's happened everywhere. They shall eat and not have enough. They shall commit whoredom and shall not increase, because they have left off to take heed to the Lord. For Israel, hard times were coming. So in heaven, God said, well, prosperity just isn't working out. Let's try poverty for a change and see how that affects the society. And while sex was everywhere, sex was common, birth rates were down. The population was not growing. They weren't having children. And so it went. It sounds kind of familiar to me. Now that was a crucial part of Hosea's message. Isaiah, writing about the same time in Judah, whereas Hosea was in Israel. Isaiah chapter 2, verse 6. You have abandoned your people, the house of Jacob. They are full of superstitions from the east. They practice divination like the Philistines. They clasp hands with pagans. The land is full of silver and gold. There is no end to their treasures. Their land is full of horses. There is no end to their chariots. Their land is full of idols. They bow down to the work of their own hands, to what their fingers have made. So man shall be brought low and mankind humbled. Do not forgive them. Kind of sobering to think of that, isn't it? When you see the picture of the incredible wealth of people who are so preoccupied with things, with possessions, who have no idea of what Jesus, of the significance of Jesus, who said, a man's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses. And here we are, where a lot of people are going to lose possessions, and they are in a panic over that loss. Then there was Jesus. One day he was teaching the people in parables and allegories, which would allow people, as I've said, to interpret them any way they choose. If you want them interpreted in such a way that will allow you to go on in your sin and doing what you're doing, feel free. Nevertheless, Jesus spoke the truth to them. Matthew 13 is the old parable of the sower and the seed. And it is very apt to where we are right now. It's been dominating on my mind for some little time as a result. He was talking to the people. He spoke many things to them in parables, saying, a sower went forth to sow. And when he had sowed, some seed fell by the wayside, and the fowls came and devoured them up. Some fell upon stony places. Now imagine that you don't know where this parable is going. You live in a society where people sow seeds, and your job, what you normally do, is you go out and prepare your ground, put the seed very carefully in the ground, and then you wait for it to come up. But you're listening to this parable, and he says, no, the sower goes out and he throws the seed everywhere. What do you make of that? Then he says, some of it fell by the wayside. Fowls came and devoured it. Of course, that's what I would expect. Some fell on stony place where they didn't have any earth. And they sprung up, but they didn't have any deepness of earth. And when the sun came up, they were scorched and had no root, and they withered away. Some of it fell among thorns, and the thorns sprung up and choked them. And other fell into good ground and sprung up, bore fruit, some 100-fold, some 60-fold, some 30-fold. Who has ears to hear, let him hear. Every time in the Bible you see this, who has ears to hear, let him hear. It is a caution that most people are not going to get this, and you had better. Jesus offered no explanation to the crowd. What were they supposed to make of all this thing that he had just told them? I don't think the disciples were comfortable with the parable either. And they wanted to know what this parable had to say to us, maybe, who are in the hard times ahead, because they came to Jesus and said, why do you talk to them in parables? He answered and said, because it is given to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. To them, it is not given. Now, was he deliberately excluding people who might really want to go this way? No. What he was doing was allowing them to interpret his parable, allowing them to make their own decision, allowing the sin of their life to cause them to misinterpret Scripture so that they would do whatever it was they wanted to do. Jesus believed in freedom so that you can choose what you want to believe. Whoever has shall be given, to him shall be given, he'll have more. Who him has not shall be taken away what he's got. So, the caution is given. Now, this is one of Jesus' really hard sayings. What are we supposed to make of it? For we are his disciples. He said, I speak to them in parables because seeing they see not. Hearing, they don't hear. Neither do they understand. In them is filled the prophecy of the prophet Isaiah, who says, by hearing you shall hear and not understand. Seeing you shall see, but you won't get it. You just won't get it. Their people's heart is waxed gross. They're fat. Their ears are dull of hearing. Their eyes they have closed. Who closed? They have. Lest at any time they should see with their ears, or their eyes, hear with their ears, and should understand with their heart and be converted, and I should heal them. Now, what on earth accounts for this kind of response from people? For this hardness of heart that you see? Jesus went on to say, blessed are your eyes, for you see, and your ears, because you hear. Verily I say unto you, I will tell you the truth. Many prophets and righteous men have desired to see the things that you see and haven't seen them, to hear those things which you have heard, and they have not unheard them. You have any idea what an incredible, staggering blessing has been bestowed upon us in this? Men like Abraham would have liked to have heard some of the things that Jesus said, that he explained to his disciples and told them this is what it means. Never heard it. Now we have been privileged to hear the explanation he gave to his men and to think about it in relation to us. To you, where you sit, the life that you live, where you are when you'll go home. Hear the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and doesn't understand it, then comes the wicked one and catches away what was sown in his heart. This is he that received seed by the wayside. Now, what on earth would cause a man to sow his seed by the wayside? I ask that question, and yet I do it every day. I do it every day. I put it out there on the radio. I sow the seed. Think about this. On the average, out of 1,000 people who listen to my program during the course of a week, one will contact us. Just one. And so consequently, this is a rule that goes way back in radio, and it's just the way it is, that you can calculate your audience by the responses that you get and know how many people are actually tuning in. I sow the seed. Out of 1,000 who hear the program, one will get in touch with us. But that's still what we must do, because we have no idea where that one person will be. We have no idea what time of day this person will be tuned into the radio. We have no idea where this truck driver going west out of San Antonio will be listening to us, or a country music station. We just have to sow the seed, and we don't know where it's coming. And we all know, don't we, that this segment of the parable is true because we've seen it with our own eyes. We have seen any number of people that you can tell it to them, you can tell it to them plain, give it right to their face, and they just, they look right through you and don't understand what you're saying. It's as though you're speaking in another language. Next, he that received the seed into stony places, the same as he that hears the word and anon with joy receives it. But he doesn't have any root in himself. He'll stand there for a while, but when tribulation or persecution arises because of the word, by and by, he stumbles. We've seen this too, haven't we? If you've been around for very long, you've seen it happen. People get very excited, about the truth. And they spring up quickly, and their first love is just tremendous. But there's no depth. There's no follow-up. There are no roots put down. And of course, when the times get hard, that guy is gone. And you don't know why. You've seen that one too. He that receives seed among the thorns is he that hears the word, and the care of this world, the deceitfulness of riches, choke the word, and he becomes unfruitful. It's this one that makes me think that hard times may not be such a bad thing for us after all. I know a lot of Christian people who simply cannot find time in their busy schedule for God. You got to pick up the kids from school. You got to do your shopping. You got to go to work. You got to drive. Maybe you're commuting an hour and a half to work and an hour and a half home. I know people who've done that. And you begin to wonder where in the world these people ever find any time for anything except going through the rat race that they're in. I know how hard it can be to earn a living in today's world. But wait. Are we earning a living? Or are we striving to get rich? Are we striving for, conspicuous consumption? I mean, what are we working for? And what are we building for? And where are we going with this kind of thing? We have kids who will go to the mall and spend a shocking amount of money on a pair of jeans with holes in them. I don't know. Can you get those at the Goodwill Industries store or Salvation Army? I remember walking through the mall and watching the kids and looking at the store windows and so forth and thinking to myself, this is unbelievable. This was something over a year ago, Christmas time, a little before Christmas time. I was down there for something else, and I was going through there, and I was looking at the wealth, the staggering wealth that was there, and I thought, what is this all about? I don't understand it. Are we working to get along for a living? Are we working for something else? And what is that something else? Maybe it's about time we learn the value of a loaf of bread and a dozen eggs. How long you have to work for it. How hard they are to find. How hard it is to put that together, especially when you have obligations for someone other than yourself. When you got kids to feed. When you have a wife at home taking care of your baby. When you've got all these things to do. Is this the time that we need to be involved with some of the junk that is for sale in places like that? Well, it's something for us to think about. Maybe it's time we learn we can actually live in a one-room apartment where you have a bed and you got a chair. And you eat in the kitchen at a small table for two, with a couple of chairs there, and that's it. And you take a shower in a little stall that has concrete walls, cement walls, no tile on them at all, cement floor, but in one of the little shower head that works sometimes and sometimes doesn't work very well. You can learn also that you can take two concrete blocks and a plank and make a bookshelf out of these things. And again, washing yourself in that shower. Now, what on earth makes me think that we could get used to that? Been there. Done that. I'm describing to you a little place at 1214 York, I believe, in Corpus Christi, Texas, garage apartment where my wife and I lived in the first year of our marriage while I was in the Navy. You can get along just fine because there is love there. There's enough to eat there. I remember we scraped up a little money because of transportation problem. We didn't have a car. That was way off in our future yet. Scraped together a little money and bought an old, used, broken down Cushman motor scooter. So one night we go off to the movie, and one of the dominant memories of that town is I think we saw Lily with Leslie Caron. Was that the name of the movie? Had the song Hi Lily, Hi Lily, Hi Lo. And I remember so well Allie on the back of the motor scooter and me on the front going home that night from seeing that movie, singing at the top of our voice, Hi Lily, Hi Lily, Hi Lo. Now, that's pretty rich living, isn't it? When you think about it. The joy and the love that we share is of a value that we can't even begin to quantify. And I really think sometimes when we get too much, we lose all that stuff. And we just couldn't have the joy that we have in our life. In those days, people who couldn't afford to qualify for a mortgage didn't get one. We rented. And we got by. Over the years, we have seen the world swallow up Christians like the jungle would swallow up an old broken down cabin somewhere, with trees growing up in the middle and through the floorboards and everything else. Everything just goes away. But I've told you all that to come to this, the last phase of this parable. He that receives seed into the good ground is he that hears the word and understands it, who bears fruit and brings forth, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. And here is the great thing to consider about this. It is in the hard times that the gospel tends to take root in people. I would dare say, if I could figure out a way to do a survey on it and ask you about the time, if you could even remember very well, the time when you finally made the turn to God in your life, the chances are it was at a time of great need. It was a time when your life wasn't working, a time when you were in pain, a time when there was something that you had to have that just wasn't there, and so consequently you turned your heart and your mind to God. It was a time of great loss. So maybe this is a good time for the gospel to take root in people. It's in times like these that we're reminded of who we are and what we're here for. Frankly, the past several years have been hard years for the gospel. They've been hard. They've been hard because it's expensive to get the gospel out before people. They've been hard because life is too good. Because everything is working. You know, everything is coming about. I can go down and max out the credit card and buy what I need. I can buy my gas. I can pay my mortgage. All these things. And the house is increasing in value so fast that it doesn't matter that I'm having a hard time meeting my mortgage. If I have to sell it, I'll make money on the house. And so consequently, people are rolling in all that. The gospel goes in one ear and out the other. They just don't listen. There have been times when people really who should have known better have lost their way. Are we heading into the last days? Maybe. Maybe not. But it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, because we should face it with the same focus, the same determination we would have no matter what the future holds. We can't know those things. Our job is just to keep our nose to the grindstone and keep going. Now, what does all this have to do with the Feast of Tabernacles that we're here to observe today? Well, this is the Feast of Temporary Shelter. That's what it basically means. It's a feast that's a reminder we're only here for a while. This is not home. We're not going to put our roots down in this society, in this world, because we are pilgrims. We are strangers. We are, wanderers in the earth. In Leviticus 23, where the instructions of these are given to us, we're told that everyone who is Israelite born should live in tabernacles for 7 days. Of course, people look at that and say, well, why are you staying in condos? Well, the Egyptians are going to have to keep Feast of Tabernacles too, but they're not going to live in booths for 7 days because they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. That is the Israelite lesson. I want you to live in booths because you lived in booths when I brought you out of that miserable, wretched slavery you were in Egypt and took you to the promised land. Now that's pretty good, but there's something else about this I think we need to think about. That is that there's a sad coda related to this feast. The original plan called for Israel to leave Egypt, cross the Red Sea, live in booths for a while down to Mount Sinai, get the 10 Commandments, get themselves organized, and move forward and move into the land. How long would they have been out there? Months? Less than a year, probably. But because they faced the challenge, and because they backed off, they had to live in those tents for 40 years until an entire generation had died. It did not have to be that way. It did not have to be that way. There are times when I think we may be heading down the same road. And I don't know exactly how to explain it. I'm thinking that a generation of us who have dropped the ball are going to have to die off before the final push to get God's work done. You look around and watch what goes on amongst us, and all the signs of it are there. I'm thinking that we have to stop looking back and start preparing for the next generation of our faith. You're living in a tent out in the middle of the desert, going your way somewhere between Sinai and the Promised Land or Jordan River. You got kids being born every year out there in the wilderness. And you think about those kids as you look at them growing up, as you feed them and teach them and tell them what God's commandments are. And every one of those kids you look at, you say, these are the ones who are going to go into the land. These are the ones that are going to conquer it. These are the ones that are going to get the job done. How do you teach them? What do you tell them? How do you explain to them, I should have been going in there with you, son. but I'm not going to be allowed to do so. My generation failed. Your generation must not fail. Paul told the Hebrews they should look at this. He wrote to them and he said, by faith Abraham was called to go out to a place he should afterward receive for inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. And he lived and sojourned in the land of promise as in a strange country, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. He looked for a city that has foundations, whose builder and whose maker is God. It may be an odd thing to say, but having hope in this world is a distraction from the hope we should have in the next. And everything changed for Israel in those 40 years. Everything changed. Through faith, Sarah received seed to conceive and was delivered of a child when she was past age. Old woman has a baby, because she judged him faithful who had promised. And there sprang of one who was as good as dead, so many as the stars of the sky in multitude and the sand by the seashore innumerable, because they believed and trusted God. Here's what my generation has to think about. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, having seen them way off, but were persuaded of them and embraced them and confessed, we're strangers, we're pilgrims, this isn't our home. Those people who say that declare plainly, I seek a better country. They all were persuaded, but they died in faith, never having got it. And I fear that's probably what's going to happen with my generation. This is the hardcore lesson, by the way, of the Feast of Tabernacles. This is our confession that we are not at home. This is our confession. I'm a stranger. I'm a pilgrim. I look for a country. I realize it's not here, and I will not put my roots down in this world at the sacrifice of where God is trying to take me. In 26 years, 25 from next January, I will be 100 years old. And if you people haven't taken hold of this by then, I'm going to retire and leave you to your own devices. Why wait? God is handing us a golden opportunity. And in fact, the hard times that may lie ahead of us, which probably won't be that big a deal, they are a golden opportunity for us to do what we're supposed to do. Parents, invest in your children. Teach them the values of life, the things that are really worthwhile. Family, love, accomplishment, result. Teach them the right things and the right values. Young people, invest in God. Doing something worthwhile with your life. Don't let this world strangle you like that old cabin in the jungle. Funny thing, the buzzword in this year's campaign, political campaign, is change. Well, it is almost as though the Lord's sitting in heaven watching the campaign going on and says, oh, you want change. I'll give you change. And sure enough, you reach down in your pocket and that's all you got. We have just had a dramatic illustration of change, haven't we? So, that's the way it goes. And you know what? We may end up the better for it. Frankly, I think as Christian people, we will end up the better for it. And it may be your kids who will give the answer to the question, change what? They will be in a position to do something that perhaps we can't do. Meanwhile, I have this melancholy feeling that keeps dogging my steps. Isaiah wrote, this is Paul in Romans 9:27. Isaiah cries out concerning Israel, though the number of the Israelites be like the sand of the sea, only a remnant will be saved. For the Lord will carry out his sentence on the earth with speed and finality. A remnant. A person here. A person there. 1 out of 3. 1 out of 10, 1 out of 100, 1 out of 1,000. I don't know. But it seems to me this pattern that was about Israel as a whole may even be repeated in the church. That even though there are a bunch of them, only a remnant are going to make it through. And for those of us who understand, we have words of Jesus that we can live for. Here they are. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. For night is coming when no man can work.
Turn the Page is a production of the Ronald L. Dart Evangelistic Association. To contact us or for more information, please visit our website, RLDEA.com.